The Montblanc pen hovered just a millimeter above the dotted line, ready to sign away $50 million. Arthur Gallagher was exhausted, completely unaware he was stepping into a devastating trap. But Clara, a waitress pouring his wine, saw the fatal flaw. So she did the unthinkable. She dropped the tray. To the billionaires, hedge fund managers, and tech moguls who frequented Laventine, an ultra-exclusive Michelin-starred fortress tucked away on Manhattan's Upper East Side, Clara Thompson was practically invisible. She was just another piece of the exquisite decor, clad in a crisp-tailored black uniform, moving silently across the plush mahogany floors. They didn't look at her when she poured the vintage Bordeaux, and they certainly didn't stop their high-stakes conversations when she cleared their bone china plates. That invisibility was exactly what made Clara so dangerous. At 28, Clara wasn't supposed to be serving caviar. 2 years ago, she had been at the top of her class at Columbia Business School, specializing in corporate law and international finance. She had a brilliant future mapped out until her father, a modest real estate developer in Chicago, fell victim to an offshore investment scam. The fraud bankrupted him. The stress triggered a fatal heart attack, and Clara was left with a mountain of inherited debt. She dropped out, moved to New York, and took the highest-paying hospitality job she could find, just to keep her family's home from foreclosure. She knew the scent of money. More importantly, she knew the stench of a fraud. It was a rainy Tuesday evening, the kind of night when the city felt claustrophobic. The restaurant's manager, David Aris, had pulled Clara aside before service. "Table 4 is Arthur Gallagher," David had whispered, his eyes darting toward the secluded corner booth, flanked by privacy screens. "He's the CEO of Gallagher Industries. He's meeting with 2 foreign investors. Complete discretion, Clara. VIP protocol. Do not interrupt them unless someone is literally on fire." Arthur Gallagher was a legend in the commercial shipping and logistics sector. Clara recognized him immediately from Forbes covers, but in person, the man looked defeated. He was in his late 50s, his silver hair slightly unkempt, and the heavy bags under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights. Rumor in the financial papers was that Gallagher Industries had taken a massive hit due to a catastrophic supply chain failure in Southeast Asia. The company's stock was bleeding, and Arthur desperately needed a massive liquidity injection to keep his legacy afloat. He looked like a man drowning, desperate for a life raft. 10 minutes later, his life raft arrived. 2 men breezed into the restaurant, handing their cashmere overcoats to the hostess. The older one introduced himself to Arthur as Jonathan Crane. He was tall, impeccably groomed, with a smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating grey eyes. His associate Philip Mercer was younger, carrying a sleek leather briefcase and possessing the nervous, hyper-alert energy of a predator circling wounded prey. "Arthur, my friend," Crane said, smoothly sliding into the leather booth. "Apologies for the delay. The traffic on the FDR is medieval. But I assure you the wait is worth it." Clara approached silently, carrying a silver tray with 3 glasses of sparkling water. As she set them down, she tuned her ear to the frequency of the table. "I appreciate you making the trip from Geneva. Jonathan," Arthur replied, his voice raspy. "But we need to finalize this tonight. My board is panicking. If the $50 million isn't in our corporate accounts, by tomorrow morning the creditors are going to force a restructuring. I lose controlling interest of the company my grandfather built." "We understand completely," Mercer chimed in, opening his briefcase and pulling out a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy stock watermark paper. "Crestview Holdings is fully prepared to execute the wire transfer tonight. We have our Swiss bankers on standby. The moment you sign the equity transfer agreement, the funds will be released." Clara stepped back, taking her position at the serving station just a few feet away. She watched the dynamic of the table. Something about Jonathan Crane rubbed her the wrong way. It wasn't just the overly familiar tone or the slicked-back hair. It was his pacing. He was moving too fast. High-level corporate acquisitions, especially international ones involving $50 million, were grueling, slow dances. They involved armies of lawyers, months of due diligence, and endless negotiations. Yet here was Crane pushing a massive stack of papers across a dinner table at 8 o'clock at night. "I've had my legal team look over the digital drafts," Arthur said, rubbing his temples as he stared at the physical contract. They flagged a few issues with the offshore holding structure, but given the time constraints, I didn't have time to have them review this final physical copy. Arthur. Crane sighed, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the table, projecting an aura of deeply concerned friendship. "Time is the one luxury we do not have. The Asian markets open in a few hours. If we don't lock the escrow tonight, Crestview's board will pull the funding. They already think I'm crazy for extending this lifeline without a full quarter audit." Clara frowned, her eyes narrowing, as she polished a wine glass. Lock the escrow tonight. It was a classic pressure tactic. Create an artificial deadline. Force the target to act out of fear rather than logic. She walked over to table 4, holding the wine list. "Gentlemen, would you care to select a wine before the first course? Just bring us a bottle of the Opus 1 2014. Crane dismissed her with a flick of his wrist, not even looking up. "Actually make it 2. We have something to celebrate." "Right away, sir," Clara murmured. As she pivoted, she caught a glimpse of the top page of the contract lying open on the table. Her eyes, trained by years of grueling legal case studies, instantly scanned the header. Crestview Holdings, LLC, registered under the financial jurisdiction of the Luxembourg Escrow Directive 4A. Clara froze for a fraction of a second, her breath catching in her throat. She walked back to the wine cellar, her mind racing the ambient noise of the restaurant fading away. Luxembourg Escrow Directive 4A. She remembered sitting in the Columbia Law Library, writing a 50-page thesis on international banking regulations. Directive 4. A was a notorious loophole used in the early 2000s to mask the identity of shell company beneficiaries. It was entirely legitimate until it was heavily abused by money launderers. The European Union had completely repealed Directive 4A 2.5 years ago. It no longer existed. Any legitimate European investment firm would know that. The only people who still used that terminology were scammers recycling old fabricated contract templates they bought off the dark web. Arthur Gallagher wasn't sitting with Swiss billionaires. He was sitting with ghosts, and they were about to steal his entire company. The tension in Clara's chest tightened like a coiled spring as she retrieved the 2 bottles of Opus 1. She carefully uncorked the first bottle, her hands trembling slightly, though she masked it with years of professional training. She needed to know more. She needed absolute proof before she did something that would undoubtedly get her fired and possibly sued. She returned to the table, presenting the cork to Crane, who merely waved it away impatiently. As she poured the dark, ruby-red liquid into the crystal glasses, she let her presence linger, pouring agonizingly slowly. "The 50 million is currently parked in our intermediary account with Banque Cantonale Vaudoise," Philip Mercer was saying, tapping the screen of his iPad. He slid the device across the table toward Arthur. "Here is the Swift MT760 message. It's a direct proof of funds. The moment you sign the final page, I authorize the release." Arthur leaned over the iPad, squinting. "The routing sequence? It looks a bit irregular." Clara, standing at Arthur's right side, glanced down at the iPad screen as she topped off his water. The screen displayed a banking portal that looked highly official, complete with the bank's logo and complex alphanumeric codes. But Clara spotted it immediately. The Swift code listed on the screen was 11 characters, long ending in XXX. That was standard. But the IBAN international bank account number started with GB instead of CH. GB was the country code for the United Kingdom. CH was for Switzerland. If the money was sitting in a Swiss cantonal bank, the IBAN had to start with CH. Furthermore, a SWIFT MT 760 isn't a direct wire transfer protocol. It's a blocked funds guarantee, essentially a standby letter of credit. You couldn't just authorize a release of an MT 760 into a corporate checking account overnight. The technical jargon was entirely mismatched. They were blinding him with financial alphabet soup. It's an internal routing sequence for our offshore trust. Crane lied smoothly, taking a sip of the expensive wine. Standard procedure for bypassing standard international hold times. We know you need the cash by 8 a.m., Arthur. This is the only way. If my lawyers were here, Arthur began, his voice wavering with hesitation. Arthur. Crane interrupted his voice, dropping to a low, authoritative register. He leaned in, locking eyes with the exhausted billionaire. If your lawyers were here, they would spend 3 weeks arguing over indemnification clauses. In 3 weeks, Gallagher Industries will be in receivership. Your stock will be delisted. Your legacy, everything you've built, gone. I am sticking my neck out for you, because I believe in your company. But if you don't want the money, Philip and I can walk out that door right now. Crane signaled Mercer, who dutifully began to reach for the contract. It was a masterful psychological manipulation. The takeaway close threatened to remove the lifeline. No, wait, Arthur said, quickly raising a hand. The panic in his eyes was palpable. He was a smart man, a brilliant businessman, but he was operating under immense sleep deprivation, crushing stress and emotional desperation. Under those conditions, even the smartest people develop tunnel vision. Arthur reached into the breast pocket of his bespoke suit and pulled out a heavy black Mont Blanc fountain pen. Clara backed away from the table, her heart hammering against her ribs. She retreated to the service station, where manager David Arris was standing, meticulously inspecting a reservation tablet. "David," Clara whispered, urgently grabbing his arm. "Table 4. We have to stop them." David looked at her, irritated, brushing her hand away. "Stop what, Clara? Get back to your section. You're hovering." "The men with Mr. Gallagher," Clara pleaded, keeping her voice low. "They are running a wire fraud scam. The contract on the table is fake. If he signs it, he's handing over the equity of his company for absolutely nothing. They are going to take his business." David stared at her, as if she had grown a second head. "Are you out of your mind?" "You are a waitress, Clara, not a corporate attorney. Those men are regular clients of the VIP concierge service. Do not get involved. If you cause a scene, I will fire you on the spot." "David, please listen to me. The European legal directive they are using was repealed. I don't care if they are selling him the Brooklyn Bridge." David hissed, his face flushing red. "In this room we serve food. We do not offer financial advice. Go back to the kitchen and check on their Wagyu." Clara stood frozen. She looked over at table 4. Arthur had the cap off his Mont Blanc pen. He was flipping to the final page of the contract. Crane was watching him with the intense, unblinking focus of a snake about to strike. Mercer's finger was hovering over his iPad, ready to pretend to send a wire transfer that would never arrive. Once Arthur signed that paper, the legal nightmare would begin. Even if the money was fake, the signature was real. Crane and Mercer would use the signed equity transfer to immediately file an injunction freezing Gallagher Industries' remaining assets. They would tie Arthur up in international court for years, bleeding him dry, with legal fees, forcing him to settle, and hand over millions just to make them go away. It was an advanced equity-stripping scheme, the exact same scheme that had sent Clara's father to an early grave. She saw her father's face in Arthur Gallagher's tired, desperate eyes. I can't let this happen again, Clara thought. I won't. Arthur flattened the thick parchment paper with his left hand. He brought the pen down. Clara didn't think. She acted. She grabbed a large silver serving tray from the station. On it rested a pitcher of ice-cold sparkling water and a bowl of sticky dark balsamic reduction meant for another table's appetizer. She walked quickly toward table 4. Her pace was too fast for the elegant dining room, her footsteps heavy. She bypassed the standard serving angle, stepping directly behind Jonathan Crane. "Mr. Gallagher, please sign right here beside the notary seal," Crane instructed, softly pointing a manicured finger at the dotted line. Arthur's pen hovered just a millimeter above the paper. The ink was about to flow. Clara tripped. She didn't just stumble. She threw her entire body weight forward, twisting her wrists violently. The silver tray flipped in the air. Crash! The sound of shattering crystal echoed like a gunshot through the silent, hushed dining room of Levantine. The pitcher of ice water exploded directly onto the center of the table, soaking Arthur's trousers. But more importantly, the bowl of thick, dark, balsamic reduction launched like a missile, landing squarely on top of the $50 million contract. The viscous black liquid splattered everywhere, completely ruining the documents, obliterating the signature line, and splashing across Jonathan Crane's pristine white shirt and silk tie. "What the hell?" Crane roared, jumping up so fast he knocked his chair backward. Arthur gasped, dropping his pen, and instinctively pushing back from the table as cold water dripped from the edge onto his lap. Philip Mercer scrambled to snatch his iPad, cursing loudly, as balsamic vinegar dripped from the screen. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," Clara cried out, dropping to her knees amid the shattered glass, grabbing a white linen napkin and wildly attempting to clean the table, which only succeeded in smearing the black reduction further across the destroyed contract pages. "My foot caught the edge of the rug. I am so clumsy. I am so sorry." The entire restaurant had gone dead silent. Every billionaire, celebrity, and socialite in the room was staring at table 4. Manager David Orris was already sprinting across the floor, his face pale with absolute horror. "Clara, what have you done? You stupid girl." Crane sneered, his smooth facade entirely vanished, replaced by a vicious, venomous rage. He grabbed the ruined stack of papers. The ink was running. The pages were completely illegible. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? These are sensitive legal documents. You've ruined them." "I can dry them off," Clara said, standing up and reaching for the papers, intentionally bumping into Mercer as she did. "Get away from the table." Mercer snapped, shoving her back. Arthur, recovering from the shock, grabbed a napkin to dry his face. "It's all right, it's an accident." Jonathan calmed down. "We can just print another copy." "We don't have another physical copy with the notary seals." Crane shouted, panic bleeding into his voice. He realized his mask was slipping, but he couldn't control his anger. "The digital files are on an encrypted server in Geneva. We can't access them until morning." Clara stood up straight, holding the soiled linen napkin. The clumsy, terrified waitress persona instantly vanished from her posture. She looked directly at Arthur Gallagher, her eyes sharp and completely lucid. "He's lying, Mr. Gallagher," Clara said loudly, her voice cutting through the chaos of the dining room clearly. "He doesn't have another copy because his notary seal is fake, and he wants to wait until morning because that's when you'll realize the Swift code he showed you belongs to a pub in London, not a Swiss bank." Arthur stopped wiping his jacket. He slowly lowered the napkin, staring at the waitress. "Excuse me, what did you just say?" Clara. "You are fired security," David yelled, grabbing her arm. Clara ripped her arm away from the manager. She pointed a finger dead at Jonathan Crane, whose face had suddenly drained of all color. "They aren't investors, Mr. Gallagher," Clara stated, her voice echoing with absolute authority. "They are defrauding you. The Luxembourg Escrow Directive 4A they cited on page 1 was repealed by the EU 3 years ago. It is legally impossible for them to hold your funds under that statute. If you sign a replacement contract, they will steal Gallagher Industries." The silence in the dining room was deafening. The clinking of silverware, the soft jazz playing from the hidden speakers, even the hushed whispers of the city's elite had completely ceased. Everyone was paralyzed, captivated by the waitress who had just accused a billionaire's associates of federal fraud. Jonathan Crane's face morphed from aristocratic indignation into something ugly and cornered. "You psychotic little girl," he spat, taking a menacing step toward Clara, his fists clenched at his sides. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but you have just ruined your pathetic little life. I will sue you for slander, defamation, and corporate sabotage. You will spend the rest of your miserable days rotting in a prison cell." "David, call the police," Clara said, her voice steady, never breaking eye contact with Arthur. "Ask them to bring the Financial Crimes Unit. If these men are legitimate, they won't mind waiting." Philip Mercer was already frantically packing his briefcase, his hands visibly shaking. He wasn't bothering to wipe the balsamic reduction off his iPad anymore. He was just shoving it into the leather satchel. "Arthur, this is an outrage," Mercer stammered, his voice pitching higher. "We came here in good faith to save your sinking ship, and we are subjected to the ravings of a deranged hospitality worker. Jonathan, we are leaving. The deal is completely off the table. Let Gallagher Industries burn to the ground." Crane straightened his ruined tie, adopting a mask of wounded pride. "You're right, Philip. We are done here. Arthur, when your board fires you tomorrow morning, remember that you let a waitress destroy your final lifeline." Crane and Mercer turned to walk away, stepping over the shattered crystal and the puddle of ruined vintage wine. "Stop right there," Arthur Gallagher commanded. The voice wasn't the desperate, exhausted rasp of a defeated CEO. It was the deep, resonant boom of a man who had built an empire from a single cargo ship. It was the voice of a titan waking up. Crane paused, looking back over his shoulder with a forced, tight smile. "Arthur, there is nothing left to discuss. We will not be insulted in this manner." "I said stop," Arthur repeated, standing up. He ignored the water soaking his trousers. He looked at Clara, his piercing blue eyes evaluating her with a terrifying intensity. "What did you say about the Swift code, young lady? Tell me exactly what you saw on that screen." "Arthur, you cannot possibly be entertaining this," Crane started. "Shut up, Jonathan," Arthur snapped, not breaking his gaze from Clara. "Speak, girl." Clara took a deep breath, grounding herself in the knowledge she had spent years acquiring. "The MT-760 protocol is a standby letter of credit, mister. Gallagher not a direct wire transfer mechanism. It cannot be deposited into a corporate checking account overnight to satisfy your creditors. More importantly, the IBAN they showed you began with the country code GB for Great Britain, but they claimed the funds were parked in Banque Cantonale Vaudoise. A Swiss bank account must legally begin with the CH country code. They were showing you a fabricated screen, a dummy terminal." Arthur's jaw tightened. He slowly turned his head to look at Crane. The false bravado was melting off Crane's face, by the second leaving behind a slick sheen of nervous sweat. "It's an offshore routing anomaly." Crane tried to explain, but his voice lacked conviction. The smooth, hypnotic rhythm of his pitch was broken. "Arthur, international banking is complex. You know this. these regulations. I have been doing international business in 84 countries for 35 years. Jonathan, Arthur said softly, dangerously. I know what a Swiss bank account number looks like. I was just too tired, too desperate to look closely tonight. But she wasn't. Arthur reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number, holding the device to his ear. The entire restaurant watched in absolute, breathless anticipation. Thomas, Arthur said to the person on the other end, I need you to seal the front doors of Levantine. Right now, nobody leaves. Then call the FBI white-collar division. Tell Agent Harrison that I have 2 men here attempting to execute a fraudulent $50 million equity strip using a repealed European directive. Mercer panicked. He dropped his briefcase and bolted toward the kitchen doors, hoping to find a service exit. He didn't make it 5 feet before 2 of Arthur's massive personal security detail, who had been sitting quietly at a corner table the entire night, intercepted him. One of the bodyguards slammed Mercer against the mahogany wall, easily pinning the squirming fraudster. Crane didn't run. He knew it was over. He sank back into his chair, his face buried in his hands, the picture of absolute defeat. Arthur ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He looked at the ruined contract, then at the shattered glass, and finally back to the waitress, standing tall amid the chaos. "What is your name?" Arthur asked, his tone entirely shifted. It was no longer commanding. It was profoundly curious. "Clara Thompson, sir," she replied, suddenly aware of how heavily she was breathing. The adrenaline was beginning to crash, and her knees felt weak. David Arris, the restaurant manager, was hovering nearby, practically vibrating with anxiety. "Mr. Gallagher, I am so incredibly sorry. I will have her fired immediately. I will personally compensate you for the meal, the wine, the dry cleaning. If you fire this young woman, David, I will buy this restaurant tomorrow and make you wash the dishes," Arthur interrupted sharply, silencing the manager instantly. He turned back to Clara. How does a waitress at a midtown steakhouse know about the intricacies of the Luxembourg escrow directive 4A? Clara swallowed hard. "I'm not just a waitress, Mr. Gallagher. Or at least I wasn't supposed to be. I was in my final year at Columbia Business School, corporate law and international finance. I had to drop out when my father passed away. He was a real estate developer in Chicago. He lost everything to an offshore investment scam, a very similar equity stripping scheme. The stress gave him a heart attack. I took this job to pay off his debts and keep our family home." Arthur's expression softened, a profound understanding passing between them. He recognized the pain of losing a legacy, the exact pain he had been facing just minutes ago. "They knew you were vulnerable," Clara continued, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "They knew about the supply chain failure in Asia, and they knew your board was threatening a restructuring tomorrow morning. They engineered an artificial timeline to force you into a panic signature. Once you signed that document, they would have filed an injunction in a foreign court freezing Gallagher Industries' assets. They would have bled you dry in legal fees until you surrendered your shares just to survive. But how did they know my board was meeting tomorrow morning?" Arthur murmured almost to himself. "That information was strictly confidential. Only the executive committee knew." From against the wall, a breathless and terrified Philip Mercer spoke up. The bodyguard's forearm was pressed firmly against his collarbone. "We had help. We had inside help. Gallagher, I'll tell you everything. Just tell this ape to let me go. I want a deal." Arthur walked slowly over to the pinned man. "Who?" Mercer coughed, his eyes darting frantically. "Gregory Hayes, your chief financial officer. He orchestrated the whole thing. He delayed your legitimate loan applications, so you would be desperate enough to meet with us. He was going to get a 20% cut of the liquidated assets once we took control. A collective gasp rippled through the eavesdropping diners. Arthur Gallagher closed his eyes, taking a deep, slow breath. The betrayal was absolute, cutting deeper than the attempted theft. His own CFO, a man he had trusted for a decade, had engineered his downfall. "Thomas," Arthur said to his security chief, "add Gregory Hayes to the list of names for the FBI." Within 15 minutes, the flashing red and blue lights of police cruisers illuminated the rainy windows of Levantine. Federal agents swept into the restaurant, taking Jonathan Crane and Philip Mercer into custody. The fake contract, stained with balsamic reduction, was carefully collected in an evidence bag. The restaurant slowly began to return to a semblance of normal, though the buzzing gossip was louder than ever. David Arris stood rigidly by the service station, completely ignoring Clara, terrified to even look at Arthur Gallagher. Arthur stood by the front door, his security detail preparing his umbrella. He turned and walked back across the dining room, stopping right in front of Clara. "Miss Thompson," Arthur said, quietly, ensuring only she could hear him. "Tonight you didn't just save my company. You saved the jobs of 12,000 employees who rely on Gallagher Industries to feed their families. You saved my grandfather's legacy. And you did it by risking the only job you have. That takes a tremendous amount of courage." "I couldn't let them do to you what they did to my father," Clara said, wiping a rogue tear from her cheek. "I just couldn't." Arthur reached into his pristine breast pocket, the one that wasn't soaked in water, and pulled out a crisp, embossed business card. He handed it to Clara. "I don't know how much debt your father left you, Clara, but consider it paid in full as of tomorrow morning," Arthur said. Clara's eyes widened in absolute shock. "Mr. Gallagher, I can't accept." "I insist," Arthur said with a warm, genuine smile that wiped years off his exhausted face. "And furthermore, I find myself in sudden, desperate need of a new chief financial officer, someone who can spot a lie from 10 feet away and isn't afraid to drop a bowl of sauce on a bad deal. If you are interested in returning to the corporate world, my office is on the 50th floor of the Gallagher building. Be there at 9 o'clock on Monday. We have a company to rebuild." Clara looked down at the card in her hand, the gold lettering catching the ambient light of the restaurant. When she looked up, Arthur was already walking out the door, stepping into the rainy New York night, his shoulders back, his head held high. The invisible waitress was invisible no more. Clara took a deep breath, untied her black serving apron, and dropped it onto the floor. She walked out of Levantine without looking back, stepping into the rain, ready to reclaim the life that had been stolen from her. If you enjoyed this dramatic story of deception and triumph, please make sure to hit that like button. Right now, share this video with your friends to remind them that heroes can come from the most unexpected places. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss another incredible real-life story. See you next time.